Story 1. My name is Alex. Recently, my family and I moved to Minnesota. My cousin, knowing I was single, often tried to set me up with his friends at gatherings. Although I hadn't found the right one yet, he was persistent. He loved camping and kept urging me to join him on a trip to immerse myself in the local culture. "Maybe you'll meet someone special," he'd say. After settling in for about 3 months and still being jobless, I finally agreed to a week-long camping trip with him and his friends, thinking it would be a good way to pass the time before I found work. We traveled in 5 cars, making a few stops for gas and snacks during the 4-hour drive to the campsite. One of his friends chose the campsite on Google Maps because it seemed like a good spot to hang out and fish. We reached the site late in the afternoon, set up our tents, and lit the campfire, relaxing for the rest of the day. A few girls came along, but none caught my interest. I talked to a few, but we only seemed to hit it off as friends. In the evening, we went fishing at a nearby river, hoping for a good catch, as fish were supposed to bite better in the evening. We didn't catch anything except a catfish, which we tossed back into the water. After about 4 hours, we returned to the campsite to enjoy the night by the campfire, drinking and chatting. We stayed up until 1 a.m. when the night started getting chilly. The only sounds were our voices in the crackling fire. A gust of wind blew past me, and shortly after, I started feeling a chill. My body felt cold, like I was coming down with a fever, so I told my cousin and his friends that I was calling it a night. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was walking to the river to fish with my cousin when I saw a girl sitting on a large rock with a fishing pole on the other side. My cousin nudged me. "Go talk to her, man. She's cute." So I approached her. She was slim and beautiful, with curves, and had long black hair. She wore a tight white tee, denim shorts, and black sandals. "Hey, any luck?" I asked nervously. She turned to me and smiled. "Not yet." "You?" I shook my head. "Nope." "How long have you been out here?" "A couple of hours. I come here often. I live nearby," she replied. Her name was Alyssa, and we chatted for a while. There was an instant connection, and I felt like I'd known her forever. Her voice was so sweet, I could listen to her talk for days. Just as we were getting close, my cousin called out for me. I said goodbye, shook her hand, and left. From a distance, I turned back for one last glance at her, but she was gone. Strange. Then I woke up to the sound of my cousin and his friend discussing breakfast. I got up and my head was pounding back and forth as I rubbed my head. All morning, I couldn't get Alyssa out of my head. Her beautiful face, body, and voice were all I could think about. That day, I stayed at the campsite due to my headache while everyone else went fishing again. My cousin returned to the campsite after an hour, and we spent the day talking, drinking, and playing cards. That night, I had another dream. In the dream, I overslept. I woke up at the campsite alone. Everyone else seemed to have left without telling me. I got up and sat on a chair by the campfire. Suddenly, I saw Alyssa walking toward me from a distance. My heart raced with excitement and nervousness. When she got closer, I noticed that she was barefoot and her clothes were wet, forming the curve of her body and showing her inner garments. I tried not to stare at her body so much and tried to keep eye contact as she walked over. As she got closer to me, the smell of a faint, rotting odor went through my nostrils to where I felt like I could taste it. I coughed a little and tried not to make it obvious and asked, "Hey, Alyssa, are you okay? Why are you wet?" She giggled and said, "I'm fine. I went by the river again to see if I could find you, but I slipped and fell in. I decided to come here to see if I could find you." I told her to wait while I scrambled to find her a towel. We sat across from each other at the campfire. Her odor was still noticeable, but I tried to hide my expression. We talked and she repeated what she told me at the river, how she lived by herself, and how she missed and hadn't seen her parents in ages. Suddenly, I woke up to the sound of my cousin dropping a pot of water. It was 8 in the morning, and everyone was preparing breakfast before going out again. While they were doing that, I was just lying in my tent thinking about my dream. It was the second dream of the same girl, which I thought was a bit strange. I was pretty quiet throughout the day, and my cousin kept giving me strange looks as if I had problems. The third night, I dreamed of her again. This time, I woke up late again, alone at the campsite. Alyssa appeared in the distance, just like before. But as she got closer, her odor got stronger, even stronger than last time, almost unbearable. I also noticed her clothes were tattered and dirty. Half her shirt was torn, revealing part of her chest. She was barefoot and her feet were muddy. I ran over with a towel to cover her up and yelled, "What happened? Are you all right?" She didn't say anything and walked over to sit by the campfire. Her face looked pale and emotionless. Her clothes were dirty and worn as if they hadn't been changed for years. I could see wrinkles on her hands as if she'd been in the water for a long time. I sat across from her again, and as smoke from the fire rose, her beautiful face and wet hair began to change. I could slowly see the wrinkles deepen on her face, and her face started to droop. I had to squint my eyes to make sure my eyes were not playing tricks on me. I didn't want to come off as weird by staring, so I told her that I needed to grab something from my tent and that I would be right out. I walked into the tent, zipped it up, and left a small opening. I slowly looked out through the zipper hole. There sat not the beautiful girl I knew, but an old woman in white clothes, still with my towel wrapped around her. Her hair was gray and white, her whole body skin to bone, her eyes black, and her mouth filled with old, jagged teeth. My hair stood up all over my body, and I didn't know what to do. I stayed in there for a couple of minutes, thinking of a plan. I then saw her stare at my tent, so I quickly grabbed a bottle of water that was lying on the ground and headed out of the tent to avoid suspicion. When I got out of the tent, there Alyssa was, sitting with my towel over her, looking normal again. She turned to me and smiled. I took a deep breath and slowly walked up and sat down across from her. My cousin shook me awake, shouting, "Breakfast is ready!" That day I couldn't shake off that creepy dream, and I didn't want to tell anyone to scare them. We had one more night left, and I didn't plan on falling asleep. I suggested to my cousin, "Why don't we pull an all-nighter?" He agreed, so we drank a little and talked until 3 a.m., until he couldn't keep his eyes open and suggested we go to sleep. We both went into our tents. I tried to stay up, but not even 3 minutes after lying down, my eyes were getting heavy. I started to hear a high-pitched ringing noise. As it got louder, I felt paralyzed. I was half asleep, but I could still open my eyes a little. Suddenly, I saw a shadow entering my tent. I felt my body being lifted and my sleeping bag being pulled away. I couldn't move. The shadow slowly got on top of me and began to press down. As it rubbed its cold body repeatedly over mine, my heart began to race and I was terrified. I couldn't move or scream. I tried spitting and biting the shadow to wake myself up. It went on for about 5 minutes until something shook me awake. It was my cousin. He said he was still up checking his phone and heard me making struggling noises like I couldn't breathe. I told him I had a bad dream. After he left my tent, I sat up and stayed awake until morning. Before everyone was awake, I texted my cousin to tell all his friends not to mention anything about us leaving. Everyone that morning packed everything without mentioning any words about leaving. When we got home, my cousin asked me what the whole deal was. I told him everything about the dreams I had. He then told me about what he saw at the river the day I stayed behind at the campsite. They saw an old broken-down cross by a big boulder by the river. That's why he was spooked and came back while his friends continued fishing. He and I froze and stared at each other eye to eye for a good 30 seconds. That really scared both of us and sent a spine-chilling feeling through my spine. We later found out that there was a girl who drowned in that river a long time ago, and they were unable to locate her body. Since that encounter, we have never gone to that location again. Story 2. When I was 17, my parents took my 3-year-old brother and me camping. It was a special spot they had always loved, but it was our first time there. Excitement filled our camper as we drove early in the morning to the campsite. It was a long 3-hour drive, and my little brother didn't take it easily. He was crying a lot on the way there, and I had to play with him to stop him from crying. We finally reached our campsite in the afternoon. As we got to our campsite, we noticed that a family had already taken over. Confused, my parents called the park management, and it turned out there was a miscommunication with the reservation. They offered us another spot that had just become available this morning. They also gave us a discounted price due to the error on their end. They said the family that was there unexpectedly had to leave camp, so it was available. This location was a bit secluded and had a big tall tree with a swing attached to one of its thick branches. My dad thought it was perfect, a playground for my brother and me during the day. We set up our tent and settled in for the remainder of the day. That night, as we drifted off to sleep, my brother started crying. He kept pointing outside the tent, his eyes wide with fear. My parents tried to calm him down and put him back to sleep, but he woke up crying again shortly after. My dad walked outside to check, but there was nothing. I couldn't stand my brother's crying anymore, so I told my parents I was going to use the bathroom and sleep in the trailer because my brother's crying was driving me nuts. They handed me the key and I marched outside. I got into our camper, used the bathroom, and lay down on the couch. From there I could see outside through several windows. The curtains were open, so I got up to close them when something caught my eye. The swing was moving slowly back and forth. I thought it was odd, so I closed the curtain and lay down. About 20 minutes in, it was getting a bit warm in the trailer, so I got up to open the window. There I saw it again, the swing moving back and forth. It moved so steadily, it was almost as if someone was sitting on it. I peered out the small window, my heart pounding. Suddenly, my brother started crying again. I could see a dark shadow darting from the swing into the woods. My hair stood on end, and my whole body froze with fear. After about 10 minutes, my brother stopped crying. I sat there staring outside the window, trying to decide if I should go out to let my parents know. A few minutes later, the swing started moving again. I was so freaked out, I closed the curtain, dove under the covers, and stayed there for the rest of the night. As I lay there, I could hear my brother crying nonstop every 20 minutes or so throughout the night. The next morning, my parents woke me up for breakfast. We were all gathered around the campfire while my dad cooked eggs and bacon. I kept glancing at the swing, remembering how it had moved by itself. I told my parents about the swing moving last night, and they assumed it was the wind. Soon, a couple of rangers drove by and asked how we were doing. They mentioned they'd be taking down the swing by the end of the day. The ranger told my dad about a family who camped here the other day with their little girl. They set up the swing for her because she'd been battling cancer and couldn't do much. The family had left in a hurry a couple of days ago because they had to take their daughter to the hospital. They packed everything, but didn't have time to take down the swing. They were supposed to return yesterday to take the swing down, but their daughter passed away from cancer, and they couldn't make it out here again. They had given the ranger a call to help take down the swing. As the ranger's story unfolded, I sat in silence, remembering the swing's eerie motion the night before. Once the ranger left, my parents looked at me in silence. My dad quickly called the management for a new area. We were able to secure a new location and moved all our belongings over there. That following night, everything was fine, and nothing was out of the ordinary. My brother didn't cry at all and slept fine. I still slept in the trailer, though. Maybe the girl passed away and came back to play on her swing, or maybe something else was out there, drawn to that swing at night, coming out to play when everyone was asleep. All I know for sure is that I saw what I saw, and my parents and I will never choose that location again. Story 3. I was 37 years old when I volunteered for my son's elementary school camp trip. It was going to be a whole week at a place I'll call Camp Pine Meadow. I was responsible for 8 students, including my son. My tasks were simple but crucial: ensuring the lights went off at bedtime, making sure everyone went to sleep, getting them up, teeth brushed, and ready for the day's activities. Our cabin was slightly apart from the others, adding a layer of solitude to our nights. Every evening, after making sure the kids were tucked in and asleep, I'd slowly try to settle in for some rest myself. But one particular night, while the kids were sound asleep, I felt the urgent need to use the bathroom. In the dead silence of the night, I made my way to the bathroom, which was located a few cabins away. I got there, sat down on the toilet, and started doing my business. All I could hear was the quiet and the distant howling of the wind. The stillness was almost eerie, but I tried to ignore it. All of a sudden, I heard a strange gurgling sound accompanied by heavy breathing. It seemed to come closer and closer from the direction of the woods, creeping towards the bathroom. My heart pounded in my chest as the sounds grew louder, more insistent. The breathing was harsh, rasping, as if whoever or whatever it was struggled for air. Then I heard it, a whisper, the word help uttered in a hoarse, chilling voice. It circled the stall I was in, the voice hauntingly close. It felt like an eternity, but the whispers continued for what must have been 5 minutes. Each second stretched out, the whispers growing more urgent, more desperate. It went from side to side and then up on the roof. Then just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I cleaned myself up as quickly and silently as possible. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was still out there, lurking. I waited another 10 minutes, straining my ears for any sound of movement, any hint that the creature had left. Finally, mustering up the courage, I cautiously opened the stall door and shone my flashlight around. Nothing. Just the empty bathroom and the stillness of the night. I dashed back to our cabin, heart racing, and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I reported the incident to the camp manager, and they said they would investigate, but I never heard anything back. It was as if my encounter with the whispering entity was just a figment of my imagination. But I knew what I heard, and to this day, the memory sends shivers down my spine.